The sharp crack of a revolver echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, causing Adelaide Morgan to press herself against the weathered boards of the general store, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to witness the ruthless businessman Jasper Blackwood threaten the handsome stranger who'd ridden into town just yesterday. But she had, and now the knowledge burned in her chest like wildfire. The year was 1878, and the unforgiving Arizona Territory showed no mercy to those who crossed the wrong people. Adelaide knew this better than most. Her father's newspaper had made powerful enemies before his mysterious death last winter, and now she stood alone, clutching the evidence that could bring Blackwood's empire crumbling down if she lived long enough to use it. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but Blackwood's words had frozen her in place. "That land belongs to me now, stranger. Turn around and ride out while you still can." The tall cowboy hadn't flinched, even when Blackwood's men surrounded him. He'd simply adjusted his hat, revealing eyes as blue as the desert sky. "That deed was stolen. The land belongs to the McAllister family, and I aim to see it returned." The tension had snapped when Blackwood drew his pistol, firing a warning shot into the dirt at the stranger's boots. "Consider that your only warning. Next one goes between your eyes." Adelaide had gasped, drawing attention to her hiding spot. Now, as she ran through the back alley, clutching her skirts, she knew she had to find the stranger, had to warn him before Blackwood's men did worse than fire a warning shot. She found him at the livery stable, tightening the cinch on his chestnut mare. His movements were unhurried, methodical, as if he hadn't just stared down the barrel of Blackwood's gun. "Mister," she called, breathless from running, "you can't stay in Redemption Creek. Blackwood means to kill you." The cowboy turned, recognition flickering in his eyes when he saw her. "You were behind the store. Jasper Blackwood doesn't give warnings lightly," she pressed, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "He's killed men for less than what you're claiming." A ghost of a smile crossed his face as he adjusted his hat. "I appreciate your concern, miss, but I've ridden too far to turn back now." "He'll kill you for this," Adelaide whispered, her voice catching. The cowboy stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and sun-warmed cotton. His eyes held her steady as he replied, "Not before I love you once more." Adelaide's breath caught. "I don't even know your name." "Clayton Reed," he answered, tipping his hat. "And I suspect you and I have more in common than you might think, miss." "Morgan, Adelaide Morgan." Recognition flashed in his eyes. "Morgan, any relation to Edward Morgan, the newspaper man?" Adelaide stiffened. "My father, he died last winter." Clayton's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. I knew your father, Miss Morgan. He was helping me investigate Blackwood's land schemes before he passed." The world seemed to shift beneath Adelaide's feet. "You knew my father, then you know how dangerous Blackwood is." "I do," Clayton nodded, securing his saddlebag, "which is why I can't leave." "Your father found evidence that Blackwood forged deeds to half the ranches in the territory. I aim to finish what he started." Adelaide's hand went to the locket around her neck, the one containing the tiny key her father had given her the night before his accident. "What if I told you I might know where that evidence is?" Clayton's eyes narrowed. "Then I'd say you're in as much danger as I am, Miss Morgan." A shout from the street made them both tense. "They're looking for you," Adelaide whispered. "Come with me, there's a place we can talk safely." Without waiting for his response, she grabbed his hand, leading him through the back of the livery and down a narrow alley. The touch of his calloused palm against hers sent an unexpected thrill up her arm, but she pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't the time for such nonsense. Clayton followed without protest, though she could feel his alert gaze taking in every detail of their surroundings. They slipped between buildings until they reached the back door of the newspaper office, her father's legacy, now barely surviving under her management. Once inside, she secured the door and led him upstairs to the small apartment above the print shop. "No one will look for you here," she assured him, lighting a lamp. Clayton removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with a slight wave. In the lamplight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, signs of a man who spent his days squinting against the sun. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, taking in the modest living space, "but I'm grateful for your help." Adelaide gestured for him to sit. "Tell me how you knew my father." Clayton settled into a chair, placing his hat on his knee. "I'm a Pinkerton agent, Miss Morgan. I was sent to investigate land fraud in the territory. Your father was my contact here, providing information through his newspaper connections." A Pinkerton. Adelaide's eyes widened. She'd heard of the famous detective agency, of course. "Does Blackwood know?" "No, he thinks I'm just another cowboy with a claim to dispute." Clayton leaned forward. "Your father mentioned he was keeping evidence somewhere safe." "Evidence that could bring Blackwood to justice." Adelaide touched her locket again. "The night before he died, father gave me this, said if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe until the right person came asking about it." She opened the delicate gold locket, revealing not a portrait but a tiny key. "I never knew what it opened." Clayton's expression turned grim. "Your father's death wasn't an accident, was it?" The sheriff said he fell from his horse, hit his head on a rock. Adelaide's voice caught. "But father was an excellent rider. He never would have fallen, not on a trail he'd ridden 100 times. "I'm sorry," Clayton said softly. "Edward was a good man. He believed in justice." "So do I." Adelaide straightened her shoulders. "Which is why I want to help you. Whatever my father found, Blackwood was willing to kill for it. I want to know what it was." Clayton studied her face. "It could be dangerous. Blackwood won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens him." "I'm already a threat," she replied. "I've been investigating him through the newspaper for months. He's tried to shut me down, threatened my advertisers, but I won't stop." A smile tugged at Clayton's mouth. "You're as stubborn as your father. More so, according to most." Their eyes held for a moment, and Adelaide felt a strange flutter in her chest. She cleared her throat and stood. "You should rest. Tomorrow we can try to figure out what this key opens." "What about Blackwood's men? They'll be watching for me." Adelaide gestured to a small back room. "You can stay here tonight. No one will think to look for you at the newspaper office." Clayton nodded his thanks. "I appreciate the risk you're taking, Miss Morgan." "Adelaide," she corrected. "If we're going to be conspirators, you might as well use my given name." "Adelaide," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Then you must call me Clayton." She nodded, suddenly aware of how alone they were. It wasn't proper, having a man she barely knew staying in her home, but these were hardly proper circumstances. "I'll get you some blankets," she said, moving toward a trunk in the corner. When she turned back, she found Clayton watching her with an intensity that made her pause. "Your father spoke of you often," he said quietly. "He was very proud of the woman you've become." The unexpected comment brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you for telling me that." That night, Adelaide lay awake in her bed, listening to the occasional creak of floorboards as Clayton moved in the next room. Her mind raced with questions. What had her father discovered? Would this key lead them to the evidence they needed? And why did the mysterious Pinkerton agent make her heart beat faster when he looked at her? Morning came with the sounds of Redemption Creek awakening wagon wheels on dirt streets, shopkeepers opening their doors, the distant whistle of the 7:15 train. Adelaide dressed quickly in a practical blue skirt and white shirtwaist, pinning her honey blonde hair into a simple knot. She found Clayton already awake, studying a map of the territory spread across her kitchen table. "Good morning," she said, moving to put coffee on the stove. He looked up, and for a moment his gaze lingered on her face in a way that made her cheeks warm. "Good morning. I hope I didn't wake you." "No, I'm an early riser. The newspaper doesn't print itself," she replied, busying herself with the coffee. Clayton folded the map. "I've been thinking about your father's key. Do you have any idea what it might open?" Adelaide shook her head. "I've tried it in every lock in this building. Nothing fits." "What about a bank box? Did your father keep anything at the Redemption Creek Bank?" "No, he didn't trust the bank." Adelaide poured the coffee. "Jasper Blackwood owns controlling interest in it." Clayton accepted the cup she offered. "Smart man." "Where else might he have hidden something important?" Adelaide sat across from him, wrapping her hands around her own cup. "There's his desk at the newspaper office downstairs. We could start there." They descended to the newspaper office after breakfast. The Redemption Creek Chronicle was modest, one large room with a printing press, a few desks, and shelves of past editions bound in leather. Adelaide's assistant, A young man named Timothy wouldn't arrive for another hour, giving them time to search undisturbed. Edward Morgan's desk stood in the corner, largely untouched since his death. Adelaide had continued using her smaller desk nearby, unable to bring herself to claim her father's space. "I've gone through the drawers a dozen times," she admitted as Clayton examined the heavy oak desk. "There's nothing unusual." Clayton ran his hands along the edges of the desk, feeling for hidden compartments. Sometimes the best hiding places are the ones in plain sight. His fingers paused on an ornate carving on the side panel. "This is different from the other carvings." Adelaide leaned closer. "It's a printing press. Father had it specially made when he bought the desk." Clayton pressed gently on the carving, and to their surprise, a small panel popped open on the underside of the desk. Inside was a narrow slot just large enough for the tiny key. Their eyes met, excitement mingling with apprehension. "Do you want to do the honors?" Clayton asked. Adelaide nodded, removing the locket from around her neck. With slightly trembling fingers, she inserted the key into the hidden lock and turned it. A soft click rewarded them, and a false bottom in the desk drawer slid open, revealing a leather-bound journal and a stack of documents. "This is it," Clayton murmured, carefully lifting the journal. "This has to be what your father was protecting." Adelaide reached for the documents, unfolding what appeared to be land deeds. "These are copies of the deeds Blackwood forged, and these." She spread out another set of papers. "These are the originals. Father must have somehow switched them." Clayton was flipping through the journal. "Your father documented everything, dates, witnesses, details of Blackwood's operation. It's all here." Adelaide felt a surge of pride, followed quickly by grief. "He was building a case all along. That's why Blackwood had him killed." The bell above the front door jangled, making them both freeze. Adelaide quickly gathered the documents while Clayton closed the secret compartment. Timothy's voice called out, "Miss Morgan, are you here early?" Adelaide gave Clayton a warning glance before stepping into view. "Good morning, Timothy. Yes, I was just going through some old papers." The young assistant paused when he noticed Clayton. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "This is Mr. Reed," Adelaide explained smoothly. "He's interested in placing advertisements for his business." Clayton stepped forward with an easy smile, shaking Timothy's hand. "Pleasure to meet you." "Miss Morgan was just showing me your impressive operation here." Timothy beamed with pride. "Best newspaper in the territory, sir, though I'm biased, of course." As Timothy moved to begin his morning tasks, Adelaide whispered to Clayton, "We should take these somewhere safe." He nodded. "My room at the hotel isn't secure. Blackwood probably has it watched." "We could go to my father's cabin," Adelaide suggested. "It's about an hour's ride from town. No one goes there anymore." The decision made, they quickly packed the evidence into Clayton's saddlebags. Adelaide told Timothy she'd be gone for the day gathering stories from outlying ranches, a common enough occurrence that it wouldn't raise suspicion. Within the hour, they were riding out of town, Clayton on his chestnut mare and Adelaide on her gray gelding. They took a circuitous route, careful to watch for any signs of being followed. Clayton's Pinkerton training was evident in the way he constantly scanned their surroundings, alert to any potential danger. The ride gave Adelaide time to observe her companion. Clayton sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. There was a quiet strength about him that reminded her of her father, principled, determined, unafraid to stand against injustice. "How long have you been a Pinkerton?" she asked as they followed a narrow trail through a stand of cottonwoods. 8 years, he replied. "Joined after the war, seemed a better use of my skills than drifting." "You fought in the war," he nodded. "Union cavalry. I was young, joined in '63, just shy of my 18th birthday." Adelaide calculated quickly. That would make him about 33 now. "And before the Pinkertons sent you here, where was home?" A shadow crossed his face. "Missouri originally, but I haven't called anywhere home for a long time." There was a story there, Adelaide sensed but didn't press. Everyone in the West carried pieces of their past they'd rather not examine too closely. They reached the cabin around midday. It was a simple structure nestled against a rocky hillside with a small creek running nearby. Edward Morgan had built it as a retreat from town life, a place to fish and think and write away from the bustle of the newspaper. It's not much, Adelaide said as they dismounted, but it's private. Clayton surveyed the surroundings with approval. Good defensive position. Single approach, clear lines of sight. Father chose it carefully, she said, unlocking the door. He valued his privacy. Inside, the cabin was dusty but otherwise just as Edward had left it. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a simple wooden table and chairs occupied the center, and a narrow bed stood in the corner. Bookshelves lined the remaining wall space, filled with volumes on history, law, and literature. "This is perfect," Clayton said, setting their saddlebags on the table. "We can go through everything without worrying about interruptions." They spent the afternoon examining the documents Edward Morgan had collected. The journal detailed Blackwood's systematic theft of land throughout the territory. He had a network of corrupt officials who helped him forge deeds, intimidate legitimate owners, and even arrange accidents for those who wouldn't sell. "Look at this," Adelaide said, pointing to an entry from last November. Father suspected the judge was involved too. Judge Harmond is the one who's been ruling in Blackwood's favor in all the land disputes. Clayton nodded grimly. With a corrupt judge, Blackwood can give his theft the appearance of legality. That's why these original deeds are so important they prove the forgeries. As evening approached, Adelaide lit the lamps and built a small fire to ward off the chill. Clayton continued studying the map, marking locations of disputed properties. "The pattern is clear," he said. "Blackwood is acquiring land along the proposed railroad route. If the Southern Pacific comes through as planned, those properties will be worth 10 times what he paid or stole them for." Adelaide set a pot of coffee on the stove. "That's what Father suspected. He printed a story suggesting as much last fall. That's when the threats started." Clayton looked up. "You've been threatened too," she shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Warning notes, a rock through the newspaper window, nothing I couldn't handle." Clayton's expression darkened. "You should have left town and go where?" Adelaide challenged. "The newspaper is all I have." "It was Father's life's work. I won't abandon it, even if it gets you killed." His voice was sharp with concern. "Some things are worth the risk," she replied steadily. "Justice is one of them." Their eyes locked across the table, mutual respect and something deeper passing between them. Clayton was the first to look away. "We should get some rest," he said, rising from the table. "I'll sleep by the door." Adelaide opened her mouth to protest, then realized the impropriety of their situation. Alone in a remote cabin, unchaperoned, it was scandalous by any measure. Yet she felt safer with Clayton than she had in months. "I'll take the bed," she agreed. "There are extra blankets in the trunk." As she prepared for sleep, removing only her boots and outer garments, Adelaide was acutely aware of Clayton's presence across the small cabin. He had removed his gun belt, but kept it within reach as he made a pallet of blankets near the door. The intimacy of sharing such close quarters with a man, especially one who stirred such confusing feelings, kept her awake long after the fire had died down to embers. She could hear his breathing, deep and regular, and wondered if he was truly asleep or merely resting with the vigilance of a man accustomed to danger. Morning brought clarity and purpose. Over a simple breakfast of coffee and biscuits Adelaide had packed, they formulated a plan. "We need to get these documents to the territorial marshal in Tucson," Clayton explained. "With evidence this solid, he can arrest Blackwood and the corrupt officials." "That's a 3-day ride," Adelaide noted. "Blackwood will notice if I'm gone that long." Clayton hesitated. "I was thinking I would go alone. It's safer for you to return to town." Adelaide fixed him with a determined stare. "These are my father's documents. I'm coming with you." "Adelaide," Clayton's voice softened. "Blackwood killed your father. He won't hesitate to do the same to you." "All the more reason I should see this through," she insisted. "Besides, I'm a witness. I can testify about the threats, about finding these documents." Clayton studied her face, seeming to measure her resolve. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we do this my way, safely." They agreed to return to town separately. Adelaide would go first, maintaining her normal routine at the newspaper. Clayton would follow after dark, meeting her at the newspaper office where they would gather supplies for the journey to Tucson. They would leave before dawn the next morning, taking a little-used trail to avoid Blackwood's men. The plan was sound, but both knew the risks were high. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Clayton pulled Adelaide aside. "If anything happens to me," he said quietly, "take the evidence and ride for Tucson. Ask for Marshal Collins. Tell him everything." Adelaide's heart tightened at the thought. "Nothing will happen to you." Clayton's hand moved to her cheek, his touch gentle but brief. "Just promise me you'll finish this, whatever happens." "I promise," she whispered, fighting the urge to lean into his touch. They rode separately, Adelaide taking the main trail while Clayton circled around to approach town from the east. The separation left her feeling strangely bereft, though she told herself it was merely concern for their plan. When she reached town, everything seemed normal. She spent the afternoon at the newspaper, preparing the weekly edition with Timothy's help. If her young assistant noticed her distraction, he didn't comment. As dusk fell, Adelaide sent Timothy home and locked the front door of the newspaper office. She had just started gathering supplies for their journey when she heard a soft knock at the back door. Relief washed over her as she opened it to find Clayton, his hat pulled low over his eyes. "Any trouble?" he asked, stepping inside. "None. The town's quiet." Clayton removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Too quiet. Blackwood's men are watching the hotel and the livery stable, but they're being careful about it. He knows something's happening." Adelaide felt a chill. How could he know about the evidence? He might not, but he knows I'm not just a cowboy with a land dispute. Clayton moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtain. "We need to leave tonight, not wait until morning." Adelaide nodded, continuing to pack food and extra ammunition. "I'm nearly ready." As she reached for her father's old pocket watch on the desk, the front window of the newspaper office exploded inward. Glass showered across the room as a burning torch landed on a stack of newspapers. Clayton reacted instantly, grabbing Adelaide and pulling her to the floor as flames began to spread. "Back door!" he shouted over the sudden roar of fire. They crawled through the thickening smoke, Clayton shielding her with his body. The heat was intense, papers and furniture catching fire with alarming speed. They had almost reached the back door when it burst open. Two of Blackwood's men stood silhouetted against the night, guns drawn. "There they are," one shouted. Clayton pushed Adelaide behind a heavy cabinet and drew his revolver in one fluid motion. Two shots rang out and one of the men fell backward with a cry. The second man fired wildly, bullets splintering wood around them. Clayton returned fire, forcing the man to retreat. "Go." Clayton urged, pressing the saddlebags containing the evidence into Adelaide's hands. "Get to the horses. I'll be right behind you." She hesitated, unwilling to leave him. "Go," he repeated more forcefully. "Remember your promise." With the evidence clutched to her chest, Adelaide slipped through the back door into the alley. The stable was just a block away, if she could reach her horse. A shout from behind told her she'd been spotted. She ran faster, her lungs burning from smoke and exertion. Gunshots echoed, bullets kicking up dust at her feet. She reached the livery stable and darted inside, frantically searching for her gray gelding. The horses were agitated, sensing danger. As she saddled her mount with shaking hands, she strained to hear any sound of Clayton following. Outside, men were shouting. The newspaper office was fully engulfed now, flames lighting the night sky. Adelaide's heart clenched in fear. Had Clayton escaped the fire? Was he hurt? Captured, she couldn't wait to find out. The evidence in her saddlebags had cost her father his life. She couldn't let it be destroyed. With tears blurring her vision, Adelaide led her horse out the back of the stable and swung into the saddle. She would head for Tucson as planned. Clayton would find her if he could. She had barely reached the edge of town when hoofbeats pounded behind her. Turning in the saddle, gun ready, she nearly sobbed with relief when she recognized Clayton's tall form on his chestnut mare. "You're alive," she cried as he pulled alongside her. His face was smudged with soot, and blood trickled from a cut on his temple, but his eyes were alert. "Barely." "Blackwood's men are right behind me. We need to ride hard." They pushed their horses to a gallop, taking the trail south toward Tucson. The night was clear, stars providing enough light to see the path. Behind them, more riders gave chase, their shouts carrying on the still desert air. "They're gaining," Adelaide called, glancing over her shoulder. Clayton pointed to a rocky outcropping ahead. We'll make a stand there, better defensible position. They reached the rocks and dismounted quickly, securing the horses in a protected hollow. Clayton positioned Adelaide behind the largest boulder, then took up a spot where he could see the approaching riders. "How many?" she asked, checking her father's revolver. "5, maybe 6, Clayton replied grimly. "Too many for a fair fight." The riders appeared on the trail below, slowing as they approached the rocky area. Clayton fired a warning shot that kicked up dust near the lead horse. "That's far enough," he called out. "Next one won't miss," the riders scattered, taking cover behind trees and rocks. A voice Adelaide recognized as Blackwood's second in command, a man named Riker, shouted back. "We know you have Morgan's papers. Hand them over and maybe you live through the night." "Not going to happen, Riker," Clayton returned. "Tell Blackwood he's finished." "Those papers are going to the territorial marshal." A volley of gunfire was the only response, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them. Clayton returned fire carefully, making each shot count. Adelaide stayed low, watching the darkness for any movement. When she spotted a figure trying to circle around to their flank, she took aim and fired. The man yelped in pain and retreated. "Good shot," Clayton murmured approvingly. For nearly an hour they held their position, exchanging occasional gunfire with Blackwood's men. But Adelaide knew they were in trouble. They were outnumbered, and eventually their ammunition would run low. "We need to move," she whispered to Clayton during a lull in the shooting. "They're trying to pin us here until daylight." Clayton nodded, his face grim in the moonlight. "I'll create a diversion. When I start shooting, you take the evidence and ride for Tucson. Don't stop for anything." "I'm not leaving you," she protested. "One of us has to get through," he insisted. "Those papers are all that matter now." Before she could argue further, Clayton touched her face gently. "Your father would be proud of you, Adelaide. I know I am." Then, to her complete surprise, he leaned forward and kissed her a brief, tender meeting of lips that left her breathless. "For luck," he murmured, then moved to the edge of their rocky shelter, checking his ammunition. Adelaide's heart raced from fear or the kiss or both. "Clayton," she began, but he silenced her with a look. "Get ready to run," he said, "and Adelaide, stay alive." With that, he stood and began firing rapidly, moving from one position to another to give the impression of multiple shooters. Blackwood's men returned fire, focusing on Clayton's location. It was the diversion they needed. Adelaide slipped to where the horses waited, mounting quickly. The evidence was secure in her saddlebags, the route to Tucson clear in her mind. But as she prepared to ride out, another idea struck her. The cabin, her father's cabin. It was less than an hour away in the opposite direction from Tucson. Blackwood's men wouldn't expect them to head north instead of south. Making a split-second decision, Adelaide led both horses quietly through the rocks until they were on the far side of the outcropping. Then she whistled the signal she and Clayton had agreed upon. Moments later, Clayton appeared, running in a crouch. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "You were supposed to ride for Tucson." "Change of plans," she said, helping him mount. "We're going to the cabin. They'll expect us to head south." Clayton looked like he wanted to argue, but gunfire erupted behind them, making the decision for him. They rode hard to the north, using the terrain to shield their escape. By the time they reached the cabin, both horses were lathered with sweat, their sides heaving. The night was silent around them, no sign of pursuit yet. Inside the cabin, Clayton immediately began barricading the door and windows while Adelaide tended to the horses. When she returned, she found him laying out their weapons and ammunition on the table. "They'll find us eventually," he said, not looking up, "but we have the advantage here. Good sight lines, solid walls." Adelaide set a pot of coffee on the stove. "You're angry with me." Clayton finally met her eyes. "You should have gone to Tucson. That was the plan." "It was a bad plan," she countered. "I wouldn't have made it alone. They would have caught me by dawn." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do," she insisted. "And so do you. This way we have shelter, supplies, and a defensible position. We can rest, then leave for Tucson together." Clayton's expression softened slightly. "You're as stubborn as a mule, Adelaide Morgan." "So my father always said." She smiled faintly. "Are you going to tell me I was wrong about that kiss too?" The question hung in the air between them. Clayton's eyes darkened as he moved around the table toward her. "No," he said quietly. That was the one thing I've done right today. He reached for her then, his hand gentle against her cheek. Adelaide leaned into his touch, her heart racing. I've known you less than 3 days, she whispered. How can I feel this way? Some things don't need time, Clayton replied, his thumb tracing the curve of her lips. Some things just are. When he kissed her this time, there was nothing brief about it. His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that matched the ache building inside her. Adelaide wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer as his hands spanned her waist. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and grief giving way to something warm and vital. Clayton's fingers tangled in her hair, loosening pins until the honey-blonde waves fell around her shoulders. You're beautiful, he murmured against her lips. From the moment I saw you, I couldn't look away. Adelaide smiled, her hands resting against his chest where she could feel his heart beating as rapidly as her own. Even when you were facing down Blackwood's gun, especially then, he chuckled. Thought I was seeing an angel come to take me to judgment. She laughed softly, then grew serious. What happens after Tucson, after Blackwood is arrested? Clayton's expression turned thoughtful. I report back to the Pinkerton office in Denver. Usually they'd send me on to the next case. Usually, she prompted when he paused. But I'm thinking it might be time for a change, he continued, his eyes holding hers. Maybe put down some roots if I had a reason to stay. Adelaide's heart swelled with hope. The Redemption Creek Chronicle could use an investigative reporter if you're interested in such things. Clayton smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I might be, though I'd be more interested in the editor. She's very particular about her reporters, Adelaide teased, demands complete loyalty. I think I could manage that, he murmured, bending to kiss her again. The night deepened around the cabin, their conversation giving way to soft touches and whispered words. Outside, the desert was quiet, offering a temporary respite from danger. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now they had found something precious in the midst of peril. They spent the night in each other's arms, sharing the narrow bed and the warmth of newfound feelings. Adelaide had never known such tenderness, such a sense of rightness, as she did in Clayton's embrace. What had begun as a desperate alliance had transformed into something neither had expected but both treasured. Dawn arrived with the soft calls of morning doves and the gradual brightening of light through the cabin's small windows. Adelaide woke to find Clayton already up, watching the approach to the cabin from a strategic position. Any sign of them? She asked, joining him after hastily pinning up her hair. Not yet, he replied, passing her his spyglass, but they'll come. Blackwood can't afford to let those documents reach Tucson. They prepared quickly, eating a cold breakfast while planning their route. The most direct path to Tucson would take them through open country too exposed. Clayton suggested a longer route through the mountains where they could use the terrain for cover. It will take an extra day, he warned, but will be harder to track. Adelaide nodded her agreement. We should leave soon while we still have the advantage of surprise. As they saddled the horses, Clayton paused, turning to Adelaide with a serious expression. Whatever happens today, I want you to know these past days have meant more to me than I can say. Adelaide touched his face gently. We're going to make it, Clayton, both of us. He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Yes, madam. They rode out at a steady pace, conserving the horses' strength for the long journey ahead. The mountain trail was narrow but well-defined, winding through pine forests and rocky passes. By midday, they had covered significant ground with no sign of pursuit. Maybe we lost them, Adelaide suggested as they paused to rest the horses beside a small stream. Clayton shook his head. They're coming. Blackwood won't give up easily. His prediction proved accurate. As they navigated a switchback trail late in the afternoon, the crack of a rifle echoed through the canyon. The bullet struck rock near Clayton's head, showering him with fragments. Ride, he shouted, drawing his revolver as Adelaide spurred her horse forward. They galloped up the narrow trail, more shots following them. Around a bend, Clayton pulled up sharply. Ambush, he warned, pointing ahead where 2 riders blocked the path. They wheeled their horses around, only to find their retreat cut off by more of Blackwood's men. They were trapped on the narrow ledge, sheer rock on one side, a steep drop on the other. What now? Adelaide asked, fear evident in her voice despite her attempt to remain calm. Clayton surveyed their options grimly. We make a stand. There's a defensible position just ahead. They dismounted quickly, leading the horses to a small outcropping where the trail widened slightly. Large boulders provided some cover. How many? Adelaide asked, checking her revolver. At least 6, Clayton replied. Maybe more, Riker's voice called out from further down the trail. Give it up, Reed, you're surrounded. Clayton exchanged a look with Adelaide. I'll handle this, he said, then raised his voice. We have the evidence, Riker, enough to hang Blackwood and everyone working for him. All I see is a dead Pinkerton and his woman, Riker called back. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Adelaide touched Clayton's arm. He knows you're a Pinkerton. Clayton nodded grimly. Blackwood must have telegraphed ahead to Denver, asked about me. He raised his voice again. The territorial marshal already knows we're coming, Riker. Killing us won't change that. A volley of gunfire was the only response, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them. Clayton returned fire carefully, making each shot count. Adelaide did the same, focusing on the riders who were trying to work their way closer. For nearly an hour they held their position, but their ammunition was running low. Adelaide's arm was bleeding from a bullet graze, and Clayton's expression grew increasingly grim. We need to break through, he said during a lull in the shooting. If we can get past them, make it to the next valley, we might lose them in the forest. Adelaide nodded, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind her wounded arm. How? Clayton checked their remaining ammunition. I'll create a diversion. When I give the signal, you mount up and ride hard. Don't stop for anything. Not this again, Adelaide protested. I'm not leaving you. Adelaide, Clayton's voice was gentle but firm. Those documents are what matter. Your father died for them. I need to know you'll get them to Tucson if I can't. Tears welled in her eyes. There has to be another way. Clayton took her face in his hands. I'll be right behind you, I promise. The lie was evident in his eyes, and Adelaide knew it. He was planning to sacrifice himself to give her a chance to escape. No, she said firmly. We go together or not at all. Before Clayton could argue, the thunder of approaching hooves came from further up the trail from the direction they had been heading. Both turned, expecting more of Blackwood's men. Instead, a group of riders in territorial marshal uniforms appeared, rifles ready. Leading them was a man Adelaide recognized from her father's newspaper, Marshal James Collins. Reed, the marshal called. Hold your fire, we're here to help. Relief washed over Clayton's face. Collins, down here. Seeing the territorial lawman, Blackwood's men began to retreat, firing a few parting shots before disappearing down the trail. Marshal Collins dismounted, approaching their position. Thought you could use some assistance, Reed. Your telegram reached us yesterday. Adelaide looked at Clayton in surprise. Telegram? Clayton smiled tiredly. Sent it from the telegraph office while you were at the newspaper. Wasn't sure it got through before Blackwood's men burned the place down. The marshal surveyed the scene. Looks like we got here just in time. You must be Miss Morgan. Your father was a good man. I was sorry to hear of his passing. Adelaide nodded her thanks, still processing their sudden rescue. With the marshal's men securing the area, Clayton finally relaxed his vigilance. He pulled Adelaide into his arms, holding her tightly. It's over, he murmured into her hair. We made it. The journey to Tucson passed without further incident, the marshal's escort ensuring their safety. Adelaide's arm was properly treated by a doctor, the wound proving to be minor. Clayton's cuts and bruises were similarly tended to. The evidence they carried proved as damning as they had hoped. Judge Harmond was arrested the same day they arrived in Tucson. Telegrams were sent to apprehend Blackwood and his associates. By week's end, the entire corrupt network was in custody. Marshal Collins personally thanked them for their bravery. The territory owes you both a debt of gratitude. Land fraud has been strangling honest settlers for too long. As the legal proceedings began, Adelaide and Clayton found themselves with an unexpected respite. Their testimony wouldn't be needed for several days, giving them time to recover and to talk about the future. They sat together on the balcony of their hotel in Tucson, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Clayton's hand rested comfortably over Adelaide's, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I wired the Pinkerton office today," he said after a comfortable silence. Adelaide's heart skipped. "Oh," tendered my resignation, he continued, watching her face carefully. "Effective immediately." Joy blossomed in her chest. "Does this mean you're considering my offer? The Chronicle could use a partner with your investigative skills." Clayton smiled, lifting her hand to his lips. "I was thinking of a different kind of partnership, actually." Adelaide's breath caught as he slid from his chair to one knee before her. "Adelaide Morgan," he said, his voice deep with emotion. "I know it's fast, probably too fast by proper standards, but these past days have shown me what kind of woman you are: brave, principled, stubborn as the day is long." She laughed softly at that, tears gathering in her eyes. "I don't have much to offer," he continued. "No land, no fortune, just my name and whatever future we might build together. Would you consider becoming my wife?" Adelaide didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, cupping his face in her hands. "Yes, Clayton Reed, I would be honored to be your wife." His smile was brilliant as he rose to gather her in his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. They were married 2 weeks later in Tucson, with Marshal Collins giving the bride away. The small ceremony was simple but meaningful, witnessed by friends they had made during the trial proceedings. When it came time to return to Redemption Creek, they did so as husband and wife, ready to rebuild both the newspaper and the town that Blackwood's corruption had nearly destroyed. The Chronicle's first edition under their joint management carried the headline, "Justice Prevails, Land Fraud Ring Dismantled." The story detailed Edward Morgan's investigation and the evidence that finally brought Blackwood to justice, ensuring his name would be remembered for his courage and principles. As weeks turned to months, Adelaide and Clayton settled into a rhythm of work and life together. The newspaper thrived under their guidance, becoming a respected voice for truth throughout the territory. Clayton's Pinkerton training proved invaluable for investigative stories, while Adelaide's skilled editing shaped their words for maximum impact. On the one-year anniversary of their meeting, Clayton surprised Adelaide with a deed to her father's cabin, now expanded and improved to serve as their weekend retreat from town life. "I thought we might spend more time here," he explained as they stood on the porch, watching the sunset. "Maybe raise a family one day." Adelaide leaned into his embrace, her heart full. "I'd like that very much." "Your father once told me that a man needs 3 things to be truly happy," Clayton said, his arms tightening around her. "Work that matters, a place to call home, and someone to share it with. Thanks to you, I have all 3. Adelaide turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "And I have everything I never knew I wanted." Their lips met as the last rays of sunlight gilded the desert landscape around them. What had begun with a warning, "He'll kill you for this," had blossomed into a love strong enough to overcome danger and build a future neither had dared to imagine before their paths crossed in a dusty street in Redemption Creek. 5 years later, the Reed family had grown to include twin boys with their father's blue eyes and their mother's determined spirit. The Chronicle continued to prosper, now housed in a new building that served as both newspaper office and family home. On warm evenings, Clayton and Adelaide would sit on their porch, watching their sons play in the yard while they discussed the day's events and plans for tomorrow's edition. Sometimes, Adelaide would catch her husband watching her with the same intensity he had shown that first day, as if he still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "What are you thinking about?" she asked one such evening, her hand finding his across the space between their chairs. Clayton smiled, linking their fingers together. "Just that some risks are worth taking," he replied, raising her hand to his lips. "Even when a beautiful woman warns you that someone might kill you for it." Adelaide laughed, the sound mingling with the playful shouts of their children and the distant call of a morning dove, a perfect harmony in the twilight of the Arizona territory, where their love story had begun and continued to flourish with each passing day.